The Boston Tea Party, a 3-hour conflict changes the world forever. The Boston Tea Party, 1773, was a key event leading up to the American Revolution, which would change the world forever. During this time, tensions were rising between colonists and the British government. Most of these tensions were coming from the taxes the British Parliament was placing on the colonists. Many American colonists felt that the taxes coming from Parliament were unfair, as the colonists had no representation in Parliament. However, the British believed that the colonists should pay for the money Britain lost during the French and Indian War. Due to these opposing beliefs, conflict rose between the two. Once loyal British colonists were starting to think of Britain as more of a foe than friend. Once the Tea Act was passed, American colonists were outraged. This was the third major tax after the Stamp Act and Townshend Act. It was time to protest. On a cold December 13th of 1773, 5,000 angry colonists met in the Old South Meeting House to discuss the newly passed Tea Act. The Tea Act caused 3 major things, one of which was outlawing all un-British tea. This in turn gave the British East India Company a monopoly over tea in the colonies. The last thing the Tea Act did was place a tax on tea for all colonists. Many colonists dreaded the Tea Act. The colonists hated this act so much because of their lack of representation in Parliament. To prevent this horrid tax from ever being paid, the angry colonists marched from the Old South Meeting House down to Griffin's Wharf, a 3.5-mile walk. There they would begin the Boston Tea Party. To prevent themselves from ever being caught for this act of treason, many colonists disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians. However, many colonists did not have the resources to disguise themselves so well. Instead, they covered their faces in soot and their clothes with a cloak. Colonists then divided onto the 3 ships, the Eleanor, Beaver, and Dartmouth. The colonists then went below deck and started carrying up tea and throwing it overboard. Many crew members of these ships were still aboard at the time of the Boston Tea Party. However, they thought better than to argue with the angry mob. The colonists who had not boarded the ship watched and cheered as the tea was thrown overboard. Some colonists stood watch to make sure no British troops passed by during the Boston Tea Party. As the colonists were hauling 400-pound boxes overboard, they encountered a problem. Because of the low tide, the crates of tea started to spill back aboard the ship. The colonists' solution to this problem was to get their apprentices to drive the tea into the mud at the bottom of the wharf. This action would make sure the tea was unsalvageable. Throwing the crates of tea overboard was not easy work. Each chest of tea was lined with lead to make sure it was waterproof. Due to the use of this heavy metal, larger crates on average were 400 pounds, with smaller crates ranging between 150 and 200 pounds. After 3 hours of this grueling work, the Boston Tea Party was coming to a conclusion. Those involved in the Boston Tea Party were satisfied with the outcome of their actions. Joshua Wythe, a participant of the Boston Tea Party, is quoted as saying, "We were merry in an undertone at the idea of making so large a cup of tea for the fishes." This 3-hour-long conflict led to the passing of the Intolerable Acts, acts meant to punish the colonies. These laws ban all unapproved town meetings in Massachusetts, closed the port of Boston until colonists repaid the cost of the dumped tea, and declared Salem the capital of Massachusetts rather than Boston. The acts got rid of all self-governing officials. They were then replaced with British-appointed officials. It also closed Boston Harbor, which hurt Boston's economy, creating sympathy among the colonies. However, the worst punishment of all was the passing of the Quartering Acts, acts that allowed British troops to live in colonial homes. The acts got rid of all self-governing officials in the colonies. King George and Parliament then replaced them with British-appointed officials. Shortly after the passing of the Intolerable Acts, General Thomas Gage was appointed as Royal Governor of Massachusetts. He was to put an end to the rebellion spurred by the Boston Tea Party. The Intolerable Acts and their effects, such as the colonists' violation of rights to govern themselves, united the colonies to join the First Continental Congress in 1774. Patrick Henry is quoted as saying, "I am not a Virginian, I am an American." The colonial representatives of the First Continental Congress pledged support of Massachusetts in case of attack. That attack came on the night of April 19, 1775. Governor Gage sent 700 soldiers to seize munitions the colonists had stored in Lexington and Concord. Thomas Gage wrote to Lieutenant Colonel Smith of the 10th Regiment, "Sir, having received intelligence that a quantity of ammunition, provisions, artillery, tents, and small arms have been collected at Concord, for the avowed purpose of raising and supporting a rebellion against His Majesty, you will march with a corps of grenadiers and light infantry put under your command, with the utmost expedition and secrecy to Concord. You will seize and destroy all artillery, ammunition, provisions, tents, small arms, and all military stores whatever. But you will take care that the soldiers do not plunder the inhabitants or hurt private property." When the British troops arrived, they were met by American militiamen, and the shot heard round the world was fired. The American Revolution had begun. The world-changing event of the Boston Tea Party, caused by the French-Indian War, was a protest against the conflict that was the Tea Act. It would also be a driving force in the colonies' compromise to unite in the First Continental Congress.